Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the Williams Brothers Hall's Bulldog Air Racer. It's a 1/32 scale kit from Williams Brothers, and it's number 32532 in their catalog. Now the kit's got about 66 parts molded in gray with one clear canopy and some water slide decals. Now, Robert Hall joined the Granville brothers in 1929, and his second design for them was this single-place gull-wing airplane, designed to fly in the National Air Races and the Thompson Race. And it ended up in 6th place in the Thompson Race, and if it had more time, it probably would have done better if they had been able to work the bugs out. But he had left the company by then, so it was considered one of the most beautiful and elegant air racers of all time. So it's got enough impact in history to have its place in our model archive. Now when you're done, the kit will be about 9.5 inches wide with the wings and 7.25 inches long. And it's an easy build, but because of the intricate decals and paint scheme, this would be considered more for the intermediate to advanced builder. Here are the kit's contents, my version of the open box review. I won't describe the parts, I'll just show you how to build them. Now we're going to be using Model Masters type liquid cement for most construction, sometimes super glue for fragile parts, and clear glue for the canopy. But as you go through the kit, remember to heed all the manufacturer's safety and use directions when using any of the products that you see used or hear in the review. Here are the decals for this kit. As you can see, some of them are pretty intricate and delicate. And I strongly suggest you use some of the setting solutions available in the aftermarket to get these to set on the details and conform to the contours of the model. These are short-run kits from the Williams Brothers, and you can still buy them directly from their website. But first thing you should do is wash them in some mild soap and warm water, and then let them air dry. Go ahead and get these parts off of the sprue tree, and then clean them up of flash and any connecting points that are still there, and get ready to start assembling that engine. Right off the tree you can see the exhaust stacks here. I have quite a bit of flash on some of them. You just use an X-Acto knife to clean those up in a sandpaper stick, and then the one on the right's ready for paint. To paint these, I just glued them to a little piece of plastic strip so that they'll be mounted. The push rod tubes molded onto the front crankcase have a lot of flash, so you can trim those up and clean them up, but I decided to remove them and replace them with some 6,000 brass tubing. I cut the 18 pieces to approximate length, and to get the black coating I used a product called Blacken It, and you just put the brass pieces in a plastic cup and add the Blacken It. Takes about 5 minutes. Stir them once in a while to get an even coating, and after 5 minutes you drain the fluid back off into the Blacken It container and place the now black push rod tubes on a paper towel. Then spray the tubes with some water to stop them from continuing that blackening process, and they're ready to apply to the engine. And now we can take the two halves of the engine and glue those together with some liquid cement. Taking a look at the propeller, I noticed that it had some sink marks on the back side, so I filled those with some putty and sanded it smooth. When that was dry, I gave it a nice coat of Tamiya gray primer, and there it is, good as new. The inside of the cowls on the plane were bare aluminum, and to get that appearance I used some Alclad paints. First a gloss coat of black, and then you do that in light coats, and after it's dried apply a top coat with a very thin coating of aluminum, and then again spray it in light coats, and then glue the two halves of the cowl together using some liquid cement. And then I painted the cylinders with some acrylic flat black paint. To give the cylinders a little definition, I weathered them using a silver pencil, sandpaper, and a paintbrush. First you just rub the silver pencil on the sandpaper, and then you gently rub the paintbrush in the fine dust. When this is on your brush, then you just apply it to the cylinders, giving the appearance of having some weathering, and the cylinder on the left is weathered and the one on the right is not. I mounted the motor to help paint it, and to do that I just glued a piece of scrap styrene into the back of the motor, and then I'll take that off before installing the cowl to the engine. I sprayed the crankcase with some neutral gray. To achieve the polished aluminum look of the prop, I used some alclad chrome paint, and the first coat of course is some gloss black for base, and then after that dries you can apply the chrome paint to it in very light coats. Returning to the cowl, I added some putty to the seams on it, and then I sanded it with some 400 grit sandpaper to smooth it out. Then I primed it with some of the Tamiya primer. Making sure that all the cylinders were symmetrically placed, I used some liquid cement and glued all 9 cylinders to the crankcase. Returning to the exhaust stacks, I painted them all with some Testors enamel silver. There was a fit issue with the cylinders and the cowl that goes over them, so you'll have to sand down the tops of the cylinders for the cowl to fit there. Before I install it, I'll touch those up with some flat black paint. I added a few more a little bit thicker coats of primer to the cowl, and now it's ready for final paint. Next, I decided to install the push rods to the cylinders, and like I said, they were cut off at approximate length, and now you'll use a file to file each one separately in order to get an exact fit for each cylinder and for each push rod. Then go ahead and glue them in place with some super glue. And now to replicate the spark plug wires, I used some electrical wiring. I just pulled out an individual strand, cut it to length, and then made the bend with my fingers, and then you just dab the end of the wire in some super glue and place it at the end of the spark plug. Now we can install the exhaust stacks, and they're attached there to the cylinders, and if you can see where the red arrows indicate, you can look at the direction as they're pointed in that direction away from the engine. Next, you can attach the hub to the prop. Now, I want to remind you, no matter whether it's plating or paint or any kind of coating, you have to remove it in order to get a good bond from your adhesive. We'll turn our attention to the cockpit components now and remove them from the tree and clean up all the flash that you may find there. So for the bulkheads, the seat, and the floor, those are bare aluminum, and to get that appearance we use some alclad again. The base coat here is black, and then you just use thin coats. Once that's dried, then you can apply the color coat of alclad aluminum. Again, you just spray that in light coats. Next, I applied the instrument panel decal to the front bulkhead there. It's a pretty decent depiction with just a simple decal. Now the roll cage was just brown primer, so I used some acrylic rust color from Testors to paint those parts first, and then I painted the throttle quadrant there in the red circle with some semi-gloss black, and the knobs are just red, blue, and black. And likewise, the stick was painted aluminum, and then when that was dried, I added some wood color to the handle. Now we can go ahead, look where all of the contact points are for your glue, and then go ahead and use some super glue to assemble the cockpit, and you can see the tube frame there intersects the bulkheads, etc. So go ahead and make sure that that's all symmetrical, and then set that aside to dry. Work on the undercarriage begins with the legs there, and we're going to glue the halves of each leg together with some liquid cement. And then we're going to glue the tire and the wheel halves together in the same manner. And after the glue dries overnight, sand down the seams on the tires with 400 sandpaper, and then paint those with an enamel rubber. Now glue the inner wheel pants to the wheel gear legs there using some liquid cement. And note the big gaps there between the legs and the wheel pants. So we'll have to fill that with some putty and the inner wheel pants there with I use Squadron, but whatever your favorite putty is. Then sand the legs and the inner wheel pants with some 400 sandpaper, and it's ready for primer when you've got her satisfactorily smoothed out. With those gaps all filled and sanded, you could go ahead and give that a coat of Tamiya primer and get that ready to dry. So mount the wheels on something, either some sprue or toothpicks, whatever you have, and then go ahead and paint the inner wheel hubs aluminum color. When that's dry, we're going to mask the tires and the wheels prior to installing them into the wheel pants to keep overspray from getting on the tires. Now place the tires on the axle hubs and then glue the two halves together with some liquid cement. And after that's dry, apply a coat of primer and it'll show you any seams that need to be attended to once dry. Now remove the wing components from the sprue tree and clean up any flash that's there. Go ahead and glue the center section of the gull wing together using some liquid cement, and do this on a flat surface to make sure that the bottom is flat and the front edge should be lined up correctly to the bottom. I decided to make a new pivot tube for the unit, so I took some 1/32 by 6/1000 brass tubing and bent that to shape to agree with the kit's part. Then I drilled a hole in the leading edge of the right wing with a number 68 drill bit. Now this will be for the pivot tube installation, and you can go ahead and glue that tube into the right wing. I use some thick super glue here. Spray the wing struts with some Tamiya primer and then paint them with some flat white. That's XF2 paint. Now we can begin work on the airframe, so remove the components from the trees and then clean up all the flash that you find around the edges. Inside of the cockpit area is bare aluminum, so we're going to paint those with a coat of Alclad base coat gloss black, and then you're going to add, after that dries, thin coats of aluminum Alclad to in real light coats to achieve the aluminum look. Now once that's done, you can let that sit and dry overnight. Once the aluminum colors dry inside cockpit area there, we can go ahead and install the cockpit, and I'm going to use a little bit of super glue to just tack it into place, and then use some capillary action for the liquid cement to glue it into position. Once you've got the cockpit into position and have test fit that with fuselage halves, go ahead and glue the halves together around the cockpit using some liquid glue, and then judiciously applied clamps to make sure that it stays in position and keeps the seams together. The airframe halves have dried. You can go ahead and glue the center section of the gull wing into position with some liquid glue. Once again, our old friend the ugly seams will appear. So go ahead and go all around the airframe looking for any seams and imperfections that need to be filled. Especially you notice the gull wing section there that has some pretty good size seams that need to be attended to. So let that go ahead and dry, and then sand it smooth with 400 grit paper. Now we can work on the canopy, and I always dip the canopy parts into some pledge floor polish. Now this stuff, once it dries, makes the glass look very clear. So you just put it into a little tub that covers it up pretty slowly, and then remove it slowly and set it on some paper towels to let one or two edges wick off any excess, and cover it up to make sure no dust gets on it. And then after about 5 minutes, you can kind of touch the sides there and make sure you wick off any excess that's still on the part, and then let that dry. And then we're going to attach the canopy using some crystal clear or some white glue along the edge and then place that into position on the airframe. Once the canopy has thoroughly dried, we can apply some tape and mask it to provide for the frame. And I just use a sharp razor blade and a toothpick, and I start by applying a piece of tape to the canopy along one of the panel lines, and I use the back of the canopy to let the rest overlap. Then using the toothpick, I just burnish that tape, and then using a razor blade, I cut the tape along the line of the panel frame there, and then re-burnish it. You just continue that until the entire canopy is then covered with some tape. And now that we have the body in putty and all smoothed out, and the canopy in place and taped up except for the frame portions, we're going to go ahead and prime the unit. So you just, once again, we'll cut a piece of wood that fits into the engine mount hole here, and then we're going to apply a coat of Tamiya primer, and this will show you how good or bad the seams are, and any seams that will need attention. We'll get some more putty and sanding. And so after that was dried and another round of putty and primer, she's ready to have the wings installed into position. So it's time then to glue the horizontal stabilizers into place onto the fuselage, and use some liquid cement and make sure that the hinge lines of the elevators are in a straight line, and then glue the wings onto the fuselage using some thick super glue. I use super glue here so I wouldn't have to make any jigs to hold the wings in position while the liquid cement dried. Once they're dried and in place, you can go ahead and address the wing root seams and tape off the outsides of that to make sure that you don't remove any detail. And then go ahead and apply some putty and sand it down flush with the tape, and then you remove the tape to expose a nice clean seam between the wing and the fuselage. Go ahead and give the fuselage a couple of light coats of primer followed by a heavier coat, and let that set and dry. Now it's time for the color coat. So I used a little Tamiya X7 and then I mixed a little flat black XF1 into that to darken it up somewhat, as right out of the bottle it's too reddish. So I let it the frame dry overnight, the cowl, the undercarriage with the paint, and then once that's done, go ahead and clean that up with some nice a damp cloth and a tack rag to make sure that you get everything off of it to get that ready to continue on with our paint. I painted the pivot tube aluminum, and then once that was dry, it was time to apply some of the paper templates that come along to use as masks for the model. And I've never done this before, but after making some copies of the template, I cut out each mask, and then I soaked them in some water until they're kind of flimsy, and placed them into position on the wing, the cowl, and the undercarriage. Then I masked off the remainder of the airframe with some blue painter's tape and some brown paper, but I did forget to take a picture of the undercarriage with the mask on, but you just follow the instructions as the paint suggestions indicate there. So with the paint masks still damp and adhering to the model parts, I sprayed the exposed portions with some Tamiya Flat Black XF1, and as soon as I had gotten the airbrush cleaned out, I slid the masks off away from the fresh paint to reveal what was left, and I was quite surprised that it came out great. I'd do that again if I had such an intricate pattern to paint. So I let everything dry overnight, and then I applied a coat of the floor polish, Pledge floor polish, to the airframe, undercarriage, and cowl. And note that I had left the masking on the tires there to keep from spraying the tires with the glossy coat. And now we can apply the decals, and these decals seem to take a little longer to soften up and slide off the backing paper, but use plenty of warm water, and as you're going along you'll want to refresh that to make sure that it stays nice and warm to keep the decals soft. And you can put them into position, with plenty of warm water, and then kind of dab them off with a soft cloth to make sure that you remove any water from underneath them that would cause a bubble, or on top, and actually as well. And once they're in position, then you can go ahead and apply your solvent solution to make sure that they stick to the contours of the plane. Now it's pretty simple to do, and they go on well, but you'll need to take your time here. But as you can see, once you're done, this is a really nice decal motif and paint scheme together. And yes, it takes a little extra time, but it's worth it. And as you can see here, some of the decals didn't quite line up exactly right. In some cases, you need to move them around, or actually, in this case, I had to get the 00 brush out and then touch those up with a little white and black to repair the missing decal connection there, which couldn't be avoided. So don't be afraid to do that. Just take your patience and a small fine brush and fix those decals up so that everything looks just right. To fix the decals into place and seal them in, now it's time, once they've dried overnight, to give this airframe another coat with the Pledge floor polish. Once again, we'll leave that unit alone overnight and let those the floor polish and the decals set and completely dry, and then you can handle it and remove the masking from the tires and the canopy. Now we can attach the wing struts and the undercarriage to the airframe using some thick super glue and lock those into place. Make sure there's good symmetry between the two sides. Now it's time to mount the engine into place, and I use some super glue for this. You don't want your engine to fall off because of all of the fragile pieces there. So go ahead and put that into position now. And now, without using any glue, I placed the cowl onto the engine and the prop into position. I did it that way so that I could display the engine separately if I wanted to take the cowl off, but that's your choice. Well, there you have it. This great little model from the Williams Brothers sure looks great on the shelf, and with a little extra patience and a few improvements, you can really improve the looks of this model. But as you can see, it has a stunning and difficult to apply decal and paint scheme. So if you're a little faint of heart, you may want to practice a bit before you take this kit on. But if you take your time and with patience, it's just a wonderful looking addition to anybody's shelf. So if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. We hope you liked this premium model scale kit review from Right On Replicas, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can do that by clicking on our logo in the right hand lower corner of any of these reviews. But you could find us on Facebook and at our website rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.